Government shutdowns are not as traumatic as you would think. Hey, I am Chuck the bureaucrat, and here we are at the end of fiscal year 2023, and we're staring down the barrel of yet another government shutdown. Now, those of you who have been with me for a while know that one of the things that government professionals always keep in mind is there's no such thing as a crisis. No matter how much media hype there is, we have always done this before. So take a deep breath, and if you don't know what to do, look to those people who are acting with a sense of urgency without panic. Those of you who have been with me for a while might remember that I talk about a meta rule, and that's when a collection of rules cause some kind of consistent behavior that isn't actually explicit in any of the rules. My personal favorite example of this is how football teams will almost always kick the football on fourth down, either punting it away or trying a field goal attempt. There's no rule that requires this, but all of the underlying rules, well, they make that the best thing to do. And believe it or not, government shutdowns actually grow out of a set of laws that Congress initially started putting into place back in 1884. It's called the Anti-Deficiency Act. And you might wonder, why on earth would there be a law that threatens government shutdown? Well, it's because the Anti-Deficiency Act has a number of controls that make sure that Congress doesn't lose the power of the purse to the executive branch. Every time Congress appropriates taxpayer money, they set three limits. First, the amount of money that can be spent, then the purpose that that money can be spent on, and then they set time limits in which the money has to be spent. You often hear this referred to as time, purpose, and amount, or the color of money. Essentially, Congress has to set clear limits on appropriations and accept the risk of government shutdowns, or completely lose control of taxpayer money. Of course, a government shutdown happens when there's a lapse of appropriated funds, and that means that the time period for previous appropriations has run out, and there's no new appropriations to continue spending. In the last 20 years, there have been 3 government shutdowns. Back in 2013, there was a day shutdown. January 2018 saw a 3-day shutdown. And then at the end of 2018, there was a 35-day shutdown that started on the 22nd of December and ran all the way to the 25th of January 2019. Now remember, the federal fiscal year runs from the 1st of October to the end of September. And the interesting thing to notice about these 3 past government shutdowns is only the 2013 shutdown started on October 1st. The other 2 came later in the annual cycle, and they were preceded by a continuing resolution. Continuing resolution is how Congress can kind of bridge the gap between 2 appropriations. If we enter a fiscal year and we don't have new appropriations, Congress can avoid a shutdown by passing one of these continuing resolutions. And essentially what they do is they modify the time and amount of existing appropriations. Continuing resolutions are way more common than government shutdowns. In fact, if you look at this chart from the Government Accountability Office, you'll notice that there has been a continuing resolution every year going back to 2010, and they usually last into, December or March. In fact, the last time we got appropriations without needing either a shutdown or a continuing resolution, that was back in 2006. So this folderol of oh no, will there be a government shutdown? Or are we going to get a continuing resolution? Well, it's kind of business as usual. But that does not mean that you don't have to prepare for this shutdown. And probably the first thing to know about government shutdowns is they do not have to be absolute. Congress can enact continuing resolutions or even appropriations for some parts of the government and shut down other parts of the government. In the most recent government shutdown, The one at the very end of 2018, Department of Defense, the VA, Department of Labor, a couple of others, they weren't affected at all. But Department of Homeland Security, the Judicial Branch, Department of Transportation, plenty of others, they were affected. Even when the Department of Defense is affected, military people are usually retained on active duty and they continue to get their pay. And since contract workers get their pay from a different stream of money than government civilians, they usually stay on their job and they keep getting paid. Although, to be honest, I don't understand all of the details. That should give you the very first glimpse of what to expect if there is a government shutdown. The Pentagon is going to keep spinning. Military people will step into the roles of government civilians. And if you look around, you'll notice that normally there's a mix of military and civilian working side by side on the same projects. So it's not like the military are going to start doing something that they're not familiar with. And it's not like every government civilian is going to get furloughed. By the way, furlough is what it's called when a person gets placed on a non-duty, non-pay status, but is still retained as an employee. There is a group of civilians who are called accepted because their work either isn't paid for with an appropriation or because their work has to do with the safety of lives or the protection of property. So the MWR folks who are paid with non-appropriated funds, they're going to keep working. The fire and police, they're going to keep working. And there's a third group of accepted employees that you're going to find in the Pentagon. These are employees who are necessary to fund some kind of function or to execute what's called an orderly shutdown. For example, when there is a government shutdown, employees have to be notified that they're being placed on furlough. So the SES in charge of a large office may spend a couple of hours on the first day notifying everybody just as part of that orderly shutdown. During the last two shutdowns, I had this little old lady in tennis shoes who worked for me, and she oversaw all the TDY for individuals who are participating in institutional training. If you've been in the Army for very long, her name was on your TDY orders every time you went to school. You can kind of imagine the types of policy decisions we had to make about institutional training when there was a government shutdown. Some courses rely heavily on civilian instructors who had been furloughed. It can be expensive to the government if you cut a soldier's training short right before they get credit, send them home, but then have to send them back later. And even if you make all these policy decisions clean and clear, there is a whole cascade of unique questions that come pouring in. Oh, and not for nothing, but some of these folks working out at the schoolhouses, they really expect that they are going to get the real information from the woman who's been doing it for 25 years, and they are not interested in any assurances some colonel gives them. So look, the rules for government shutdowns are well established by the Office of Personnel Management. If you want a good start, try this guide to government shutdowns. Oh, and then there's this final thought. People are going to tell you that you can't announce a government shutdown until it actually kicks in. But that does not mean that you can't take some simple leadership steps. Ask your people what their concerns are, and then get answers about those questions. That'll help reduce stress. Ask your front office if they have a template for how to notify employees. And ask whether or not you have to notify people in person or if you can do it virtually. In the past, that has been a sticky point, but with our recent experience with telework, you would think that it would go very smoothly. Finally, just find some old dudes who were there in 2018 and get them talking about the experience. You'll learn a lot from them. And now, if you want to understand more about what's going on with this whole fiscal year thing, watch this video.